Hey there friends, we're back!
It's Vanessa
And Kaylee.
and we're back with another episode of The Struggle is Real.
Because we know the struggle to talk about mental health and be mentally healthy is real.
The struggle is real.
So last week we got to sit down with Dr. Brad McNeil and we got to learn a little bit more about when we should seek help if we don't feel like we're coping optimally. But this week we really want to talk about what does that actually look like? Who do we talk to? Who do we call? How do we actually get support?
Who are you gonna call? Not the Ghostbusters, unfortunately.
They're terrible mental health people.
Before you turn off this video, just keep in mind that even if you don't need support right in this moment, there might be a time in the future where you do. And as we talked about a million times before, it's never a good idea to wait until you need help to figure out how to get help.
Exactly. Also, it's great to know these things because maybe you don't need it, but you could be the knight in shining armor that helps a friend who may be not coping optimally and needs some of these things.
So today we're going to be talking about how you actually get support from various different kinds of health professionals.
The first thing that you need to know is that the people that you're going to be seeking support from should be regulated health professionals.
What the heck is this, you might be asking? That's a great question. I didn't know either. A regulated health professional basically is just someone who is registered with some kind of governing body. So it means that the governing body sets out exactly what kind of training they have to have, what kind of practices they should be using, how they must behave in their workplace, and also it gives you a chance to have someone to complain to if they're not doing their job properly. So today we're going to be talking about the 4 most common kinds of people that you should be talking to if you're having a mental health problem. We're going to be talking about your family doctor, a community counseling, a psychologist, and a psychiatrist. So these are all things that you should know.
And there's definitely more of them, but this is all that we can fit in the video today. So we'll briefly touch upon them and then you can go out in the world and do your own research for those. The first one is your family doctor. And this might not be the person you first think of when thinking about your mental health, but this is an awesome first resource to go to when you might not be coping optimally.
Your family doctor knows a lot about your medical background and the stuff that you've probably been experiencing previously in your life, and so they're a really great person to kind of tie things together for you.
The great thing is family doctors know a lot about the community resources out there. They know about wait times, what's going to be the best fit for you, how much things cost. They're really, really knowledgeable. Family doctors are also really great because they can write prescriptions for medications to help treat mental health symptoms.
And this is really awesome because sometimes the wait list to see a psychiatrist is really long.
The pros and cons for seeing your family doctor to help you cope with mental health problems, the pro being that they're the gatekeeper to community resources and they really should be your first stop when you're not coping well.
The con of going to see your family doctor to seek help with a mental health problem, though, is that they probably won't be the last stop on your route to optimal mental health. They might have to refer you to somebody else. There might be other people that you need to talk to before you really get to that final place that you want to be at.
So don't get discouraged if you see your family doctor and you don't feel like things are like 100% solved by that point.
The second person you can go to seek help with a mental health problem is a community counselor. The great thing about community counseling is that it's often free. Usually they're offered from some kind of community service or community programming that exists, and so there's no cost to you to access this service. Because of this, though, you can imagine that this often means that there's quite a long wait list to go see these people. So depending on the kind of services you're accessing, you might have to wait a while to actually get in to see somebody. You should look into this a little more, though, because sometimes they have different kind of tiers of programming. So you might be able to access something called like prompt services or immediate services where they see you right away, but only for a short period of time, versus more of their long-term care programs that might require a bit longer of a wait list, but that you see them for a longer period of time. The great thing about this is that you don't need a referral from anybody to go see these people. You can just show up at the community counseling office and say, I need to talk to somebody, and they'll be able to refer you within their agency.
Pros and cons for community counselors. The pro being they're really, really good for kind of smaller issues. So maybe you just went through a breakup or you're going through a big life transition. They're really good for this like solution-focused coping.
Another pro is that this is definitely going to be a much cheaper option than going to see a psychologist if you don't have coverage for that. A con of going to see a community counselor, though, is that for certain insurance coverages or for certain job requirements, you might actually have to get a diagnosis for a mental health problem, especially if you require some kind of accommodation. And unfortunately, the community counselor will likely not be able to do this for you.
Another con is that there can be variability in who is a community counselor. This could be a social worker, a psychologist, a family doctor. So you really need to check what are their qualifications and what type of therapy they do, because you want it to be the best fit for what you need. The next person you can see is a registered clinical psychologist. And a clinical psychologist is somebody who has extensive training in both the assessment and the treatment of psychological disorders. So psychologists get a lot of training in both research and evidence-based practice and actually practicing those evidence-based practice. So you know when you get to see them that they've had a lot of training in what you need.
So even though psychologists get a lot of training in the different kinds of practices they can use, there's still a lot of different practices that they can use, a lot of different therapies that are out there. Some of them involve a lot more like short-term, like solution-focused therapies, and some of them are a lot more, drawn-out talk therapies. So you need to still do a little bit of research to make sure that the kind of therapy your psychologist is doing is the right fit for you.
Psychologists can be in a hospital setting or in a medical team, or they can be in private practice. And the ones who are in those hospital settings, usually you're going to need a referral to them. But somebody who's in private practice, you can just call them up and book an appointment pretty quickly.
Keep in mind this also is going to have a big impact on wait lists. So the psychologists that are working in these more hospital medical settings, there might be a much longer wait list for them, whereas the private practice, you can probably get in pretty quickly.
The pros and cons of seeing a psychologist is that they have extensive training in therapy and all the different types of treatments out there.
The other pro is that you can get a diagnosis from a psychologist, and so if you need that official documentation for insurance or work purposes, that's really important.
The con of seeing a psychologist is that it can be very, very expensive. Some psychologists run from $150 to $200 an hour, and so that can be really out of some people's budget.
Like ours.
However, if you have insurance, sometimes these costs can be reduced because there's some coverage.
A lot of psychologists also offer a sliding scale, which is just a fancy way of saying that they'll charge you differently depending on what your income is. And then the final con that we just want to mention is that the wait list can be really long to see psychologists depending on how you're trying to access them, like we were saying. So especially if you're living in a rural setting or if you're trying to see a hospital-based psychologist, you might end up waiting quite a while. The last health professional we wanted to talk to you about was the psychiatrist.
Psychiatrists are trained medical doctors, and so they go through medical school, they get all of that training, but then they specialize into mental health and understanding how medications and the role of biology plays into mental health.
So this means that the majority of psychiatrists really just focus on what role medications can play in your mental health. Some of them do take on extra training so they can offer some counseling as well, but the majority of their role is going to be providing medications for you.
Often psychiatrists will work in hospital settings, and they work on health teams that usually have psychologists on them, and so if they're not able to offer talk therapy, then they can usually refer you on to the psychologist who can.
So the pros and cons of going to see a psychiatrist. The pro is that a psychiatrist can offer you prescriptions, so medications, to deal with the symptoms of your mental health problems, and sometimes this can be a really integral part of managing the symptoms of your mental health problems.
Another pro is that psychiatrists are free in Ontario where we live. Maybe not necessarily everywhere, but they are covered.
Because they're part of that College of Physicians, the insurance companies treat them as every other kind of doctor, and so they're covered under that kind of insurance.
A con of seeing a psychiatrist, though, is that there can be really long wait lists.
And because of this, even if psychiatrists do want to offer you some kind of talk therapy or counseling, they often don't have the time to do that. Sometimes this can often feel too that they're trying to pressure you into medications, and that might not be the case. It might just be that that's kind of what they're best at, and so that's what they're trying to offer you. So those are the 4 most important people that you should know when you're trying to seek out help for a mental health problem. But another important thing you should know is that a lot of the times these 4 people actually work together.
So you might not just see one of them. You might not just have a family doctor or see a psychiatrist. Often nowadays they work as teams or multidisciplinary teams or health teams, and so they all work together to help you cope with mental health problems.
Another thing we want you to know is that there are a lot of other kind of professionals that can help you with mental health problems. We just don't have time to squish them into this video. Some that you should try looking into are occupational therapists, and mental health nurses, social workers, psychotherapists. These are all other things that you can do to try and get help with a mental health problem. If you're not sure where to get information about these things, feel free to ask your family doctor because they definitely know more about them.
The key message that we want you to take home today is that anybody who's offering you to help you with your health should be trained and licensed. You wouldn't just trust some unregistered back alley doctor to give you medical advice, perform an operation on you, and we should treat mental health in the same way. Make sure the person is registered and licensed.
So your challenge for this week is to make a plan for how you would seek out supports if you needed them.
So what you can do is maybe talk to your family doctor about some of these, or Google some of the things we talked about. See the wait list, see how much things cost, because you don't want to have to be dealing with all of these things if you're in kind of a tight spot with your mental health.
Exactly, and like we said, even if you don't need help right now, it's always good to have a plan for this for yourself and if someone in your life needed it. Alright, so thanks for sticking with us with another episode of The Struggle is Real. We know the struggle to talk about mental health and be mentally healthy is real.
But hopefully after this week, it's a little bit easier.
The struggle is real.